A lot of times your answer will be given in interval notation. So in interval notation, we look at where does your answer start and where does your answer stop. So in telling people that you can use a number or an endpoint or not use an endpoint, we use our grouping symbols. And our grouping symbols that we use in interval notation are parentheses or brackets. So for example, if I have x is less than 3, on a number line it would look like this. Here's the number 3. We go all the way to the numbers out to negative infinity, x less than 3. We cannot use the number 3, so we often put an open dot on the number 3. When we use an open dot, we're going to be using a parenthesis to represent that when we do our interval from start to stop. So from left to right, we start at negative infinity. We stop very close to the number 3, but not at 3, because there's no equals on my inequality here. So we're going to be using parentheses. The only time we're going to be using a bracket is if I have a filled in dot and I see an equal symbol with my inequality symbol. Otherwise, it's an open dot and we use a parenthesis. So on negative infinity, there is no dot. There's no filled in dot. That's the only time you'd be using a bracket. So we use a parenthesis on the end of the negative infinity. If the problem had been less than or equal to, so we've got our 3, and all numbers less than will be shading in, or equal to. Now we've got the equals, so I can use a filled in dot to indicate that the number 3 would work in this inequality. 3 is less than or equal to 3. So from left to right, we start at negative infinity, we stop at 3. There is no dot, a filled in dot on the negative infinity, so we use a parenthesis. But on the number 3 now, there is a filled in dot because there was an equals next to that number. So we use a bracket. If it had been x is greater than 3, so all numbers bigger than 3 will work in that inequality out to now positive infinity. There is no equals on the number 3, so again, we can't use the number 3, we use an open dot. Starting from left to right, we now start very close to the number 3. My shading then goes out to infinity. And again, no filled in dots, so it's parentheses on both ends. But if I have an equals on it, so now x's, all my x's greater than or equal to 3. So greater than 3 goes in this direction. Equal to means I've got a filled in dot. So from left to right across the number line, where does my shading start and where does it stop? It starts at 3, it goes out to infinity. And because we have a filled in dot on 3, we use a bracket. If it's a compound inequality, in other words, I see something like this, that means my x is in between two numbers, 2 and 5. And any number in between 2 and 5, I can select as a solution. But because there's no equals next to the 2, I'm going to use an open dot. Because there's an equals next to the 5, I fill in the dot. So now going from left to right, I now start very close to the number 2 and stop at the number 5. Because there's an open dot, because there was no equals on that inequality, there's going to be a parenthesis. But if there's an equals next to the number, then you're going to use a bracket. So if this had been switched around, all right, the drawing's going to be similar, but now the filled in dot is on 2 because the equals is close to the number 2. All numbers in between, 5, but there's no equals, so it's an open dot. So this one would be 2 to 5 with the 2 with a bracket on it because the dot was filled in.